Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're at. Thanks again for joining us today. And it's my pleasure to introduce Laurence Wood. Lori heads the Agile COE at William Hill. And I had the pleasure of meeting Lori earlier this year in London during some training. And not only does he have the typical well-versed experience somebody in a position like Lori has, but what I did find fascinating was based on some of the geographic locations he's worked, he had some absolutely thrilling stories. And so that's why, Lori, underneath your, episode 3, Laurence Wood, I put always dynamic because you had some absolutely fascinating things to cover. Let me get out of this so we get more into a side-by-side mode here. So what we've got to talk about today is large-scale transformations or adoptions of discipline agile, and it's one of the reasons why the first person I thought of for that was Lori. So Lori, what I'd like to ask is, can you start off by giving everyone just a little bit of the context and background of William Hill and what you have had from sort of a historical perspective on using an agile way of working, and then I'm going to have a follow-on question to that with DA.
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks, Josh. Um, yeah, so I've been at William Hill only for 6 months, so I'm still finding my way. Especially, I've got my lockdown beard, so especially during lockdown, I'm finding my way, which is not as easy. But in terms of the history, Agile has been part of the furniture at William Hill for quite a few years. So our people are relatively mature from an Agile point of view. In terms of what it looks like, we've got between 70 and 100 teams at any one time, so it's quite large. 1,000 technology people split across 6, 7 cities. So all the challenges that brings with working remotely all the time, not just during lockdown. Last year, in terms of the history, last year there was a decision made to move more in the direction of DA. So the whole agile journey, and I guess we'll talk a bit later about specifically why, but over the last six months or so, we've started on a journey to go much more down the DA route. And one of the key the goal that we're looking for is to actually offer the chance to those 1,000 people to become certified in DA. So that was a key decision that we took. Well, it was taken last year before I joined, and then part of that journey was getting me on board as well.
And while that decision was taken, that kind of leads into right, we're building up to like why DA. So with all the different approaches in the industry, some more popular than others, or some have a pretty good market share these days. What was it in your perspective that decision was made around? And then as you've come in and led this, what do you feel about DA?
Yeah, so I should say I then was new to DA. I'd worked as a consultant and a trainer and a coach using other agile methods and before that non-agile methods. So I was comfortable learning new methods, but the more I learned about DA as I was going through the interview process, the more I liked it. I'd say there's a couple of key reasons why it suits William Hill. One, the sort of least exciting is that we want to wrap some governance around everything, and it gives us a good way of operating at a portfolio level and reporting into the business and financially, but still allow our teams to work in a very Scrum manner, which is what a lot of our teams are doing. All of our teams are different, and they're in different cultures and different cities, but Scrum is very common. So governance was one good thing, to be able to track progress and talk in a business language to the business, not using agile jargon, and DA gives us some of that governance. But I think more interestingly, what I like about it and what fits with our culture and the way we want to progress the culture is that DA we really like the process goals. And the way I summarize that is that it gives us something prescriptive, but it's prescriptive around outcome. And I really like that. So we can drive the same outcome across the teams and give them a lot of tools in terms of processes that they can use, but we're not telling them exactly what to do. And from a cultural point of view, I really like that, because I always try to teach people, and myself, I try to lead by outcome. I really like to say to people that Donald Trump said, let's build a wall, whereas Kennedy said, let's fly to the moon. And I really like the difference between those two things. And in a simple way, that's what process goals give us, because we can say, right, here are your process goals, use which ones you like and that are relevant in your context, but we're really prescriptive about what outcomes we're looking for. So I say that's the key thing for us, is the process goals.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that I've talked before in some of these webinars about a differentiator of DA being not, teams are different, individuals are different, and not having a one-way approach and allowing flexibility while still driving towards, again, an outcome or something that you're going to be able to measure differently than we kind of have in the past. So there is a question in the Q&A that I'm going to read, because it actually was something that was on my mind as well. So Magesh asks, why discipline agile and why not safe or scrum at scale? And I know you talked about lots of teams, but do you need a scaled approach with teams of teams?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and we try, certainly I try to never say that anything is wrong to anybody, and certainly as an organization we would say that to our teams. We encourage them to be self-managing and to be innovative. What I think DA gives us, which some of those other scaled approaches don't, is that flexibility down at the team level. So one of the first things we're teaching people, particularly people who are very aligned and almost sometimes religious about Scrum, one of the first things we teach them is, well, you can carry on using Scrum because that is one of the life cycles. So I know that life cycles are growing, but I really like the fact that we can get a team through the training and very quickly they understand, okay, there's the 6, now there's more than 6, but when we were training at the time, there were 6 life cycles. And one of the key outcomes that we look for from that education is that people can tell us which life cycle they believe that they are using. And I use the word believe deliberately, because I don't even care actually if they get it wrong. I just care that they think they know.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, in my experience as well with teams that have been working, together at an organization and using a Scrum approach, and there's a bit of that reluctance or just, yes, we like Scrum. And you ask a little bit of the things that we might see where the Agile life cycle, one of those 6 you referred to, really extends Scrum's construction focus. And the little bit of work that we do up front in inception, again, a lot of teams will call that sprint 0, or just some of the work that they're doing to make sure they're in a good position to actually get on with the scope of work, assuming it's a quantity enough that requires using a life cycle like the Agile one versus continuous delivery. So it really does minimize some of the, well, I like Scrum and now you're going to have me do something else, where it's, well, an instance of DA is very similar to Scrum, and you can get the benefits of some of the underlying, the lightweight governance model between those 3 phases and the milestones that are there.
Yeah. So for some of our people, I didn't say before, we've had approaching 100 people gain their certification so far. So that's been frustrated by the COVID situation. I would have hoped it would have been more like 500 by now. But so the outcome for a lot of those people who are more like the engineering people is that if they're already using Scrum, they can come off our certification course, and life probably doesn't change very much for them. Mm-hmm. It's probably more of more interest maybe, or more going to impact more somebody who's in a Scrum Master type role or some sort of leadership role. Disciplined Agile is going to give them a lot more to their toolbox in terms of the goals, etc. A lot of engineers who are already pretty comfortable with Agile and using Scrum, I think they just come away with some good education, which is always good. and they come away with a confidence that we're happy that they're doing the right thing and they should carry on as long as they strive to improve. And maybe that then makes me think of guided continuous improvement, which I also really like in DA. My background originally was lean. My first job was an apprentice in a car factory. I used to work for Jaguar, or Jaguar, as a lot of you might say. So I learned about lean on the shop floor, and that whole continuous Kaizen Toyota type mentality was actually where I came from. So I came at Agile from a lean perspective. So I really like guided continuous improvement. And one of the things I'm working on at the moment is trying to bring that in as to almost formalize the way that people are improving things. Even though, as you can probably tell already, I don't like to formalize too much, but it is giving us a process by which we can monitor dozens of teams improving.
Yeah. Yeah, and one other thing I'll also kind of add in as far as the question that comes up a lot again, why not say for large scale Scrum or even Nexus from Scrum.org. And for one, for those of you that are in attendance that don't have a lot of awareness yet around Disciplined Agile and what's in the toolkit, one of the 6 life cycles that Lori mentioned is called program life cycle. And although it says program, it's really the teams of teams life cycle. And you could configure that life cycle and through the options and the decision points in these process goals, again, to be an instance very, very similar, if not almost exact, to what SAFe has. But you can also start to use a little bit of a variation between your teams. And do all teams need to be working in exact same lockstep, tightly aligned, or can they have differences in their way of working? So that's one thing that I run into quite a bit. And the other is at organizations, especially Laura, I would imagine at William Hill with such a large group of professionals that are maintaining your products. Not all of those products need a teams of teams approach. There are probably areas where a team is working and they can manage dependencies and manage just the interactions that they need to with other teams or other individuals in the organization from a support and interaction standpoint, but they don't need to be on that common cadence like a scaled approach would.
Yeah, I think that flexibility is really key for us. Only today I listened to some people talking about some retention challenges across 4 teams, and they very, very quickly moved on to deciding that those 4 teams might be better operating as 2 teams. And I was quite impressed. I don't really mind what's the right answer for that, but I was impressed at how quickly they were happy to talk about that as a potential option for them. So yeah, certainly across our teams, I can't even tell you how many teams we've got. That's how flexible it needs to be. So yeah, we would expect teams to work very differently depending on their context, on their capability, even the culture of the city that they're operating in, and the culture that their product owner and their business is working within, because they're not always together. We prefer them to be together, but they're not always together. So that flexibility, yeah, we want to operate at scale, but we want to have dozens and dozens of teams working differently.
So we have another question. Dinesh asks, does Disciplined Agile built on lean principles where people focus mainly on systems thinking to adopt a process for their teams, which gives actual business outcome by streamlining their practices? And I'll answer a little bit of this first, and then Laura, I'll have you jump in. But yes, so Disciplined Agile it takes into consideration not only Agile principles, but lean principles. So there is quite a bit in the toolkit around the environment and the environment needed to be able to optimize the whole. And that's not just on a team by team basis or a product basis. It's looking at value streams, taking a look at from end to end, what's going to, where a customer is going to trigger something and then ultimately want to get value from that. All of the things that are part of that value stream or even the intersecting value streams. And the other thing is we do teach in the workshops quite a bit on looking from a lean principle perspective, a lot of things like cost of delay, right? How we can make significant improvements just in reducing the wait time in between activities, not just down again at the development team aspect, but all the way through from beginning to end. And so, Lori, from a lean principles perspective, is there anything specifically that you're seeing you're trying to provide an environment for at William Hill?
Yeah, it makes me think of a few things, and these are things that I wouldn't say I've achieved yet, but that I'm trying to establish at the moment. One thing that has been done really well, and this is before my time, so I'm not taking credit for this, is value stream mapping. So looking at, you said waste, so looking at waste and looking at the flow of value through the organization. So that's something that teams are taught quite early on in their education journey. We actually teach that in the context of their DevOps training, interestingly. I hadn't mentioned before that the DevOps learning has happened much earlier than I would have seen it in other organizations, and that's been really successful. So leading with the DevOps aspects, which DA gives us as well. So those value stream mapping within DevOps has been really effective. It makes me think of a few other things as well. So maybe not strictly lean, but servant leadership. We certainly like that, and we talk often about keeping the right balance between pure servant leadership, but also driving commercial delivery needs. We're a very commercial organization. Obviously, sports betting is very competitive. The other thing that it makes me think of is around what I would call a process for coaching. So we have coaches across different, they sit in different business units. And what I've been thinking about is how do we manage that? How do we get the best value out of coaching? It's very hard to prove your value as a coach. I know I've struggled with that in the past. It's almost impossible. So I see the lean aspects of DA as a process that we can use to show people how we are coaching and how that coaching is adding capability, which I think is a really hard thing to explain and to prove. But I would use going back to this guided continuous improvement, which for people who don't know, links into the plan, do, check, act type of lean process, that we can put that in place as a process which shows this is our process for improving our process. And people start to understand that when we use DA to talk about that. Does that make sense, Josh?
It does. And it also makes me think you had mentioned sports betting and where we're at currently with COVID and everybody working, remotely or virtually. How have you been able to benefit from Discipline Agile within that context and being able to have more agility and shifting what the focus is and some of the improvements from people working remotely these days?
Yeah, sure. So just a brief bit of background, because it's also quite funny. But sports betting obviously has kind of collapsed, and we're talking global here, so it could be any sport globally. We're operating in the States as well. So I can tell you, I don't know much about betting, but I can tell you that most of the money is going on table tennis at the moment, or it was a few weeks ago. You can play table tennis in a room, and it's big in China. That's as much as I know. The other thing is Belarus. Belarus is still playing football, so there's a lot of money going on that. But yeah, so to answer your question, Josh, specifically what we were able to do is to pivot a lot of the people who were working in sports betting. A lot of those teams have been switched onto what we just call gaming, so online casinos, bingo, these sorts of products. We have a lot of those products. So I think really it's through having solid product ownership that you can quickly almost tear down your backlog, come up with a totally new backlog against a different product set or a product family. And it's not easy, but it's definitely been done very quickly compared to other places I've worked. So we had a call quite a few weeks ago now, 2 or 3 weeks ago, where we were told across all the teams that the average productivity has gone up 15% since we locked everybody down. So I think to have pivoted to, we're roughly 50-50 the business in terms of sports book versus gaming. So to have pivoted half of our people and increased productivity says something good about the product management that's going on, I think. So I was impressed by that.
Interesting. Yeah, and we have a couple of other really good questions. So I'll start off with one because I know this was definitely something that was on the list for me to ask you. So Angela asked, could you share some resources to develop a DA mindset for beginners? And I'm gonna take that and also say, like, how can chapter members of PMI, how can people in the community in the UK, in your opinion, like, what are some of the things to start getting more awareness and getting people to see the value in this approach?
Yeah, so two things come to mind. One is a very practical thing that we did that I would recommend is that we use the posters. So on the DA website, there are posters which, for example, include the various life cycles. And what we did, which was very simple but really worked, and I will do it again, is we printed out those posters. Feels a bit irrelevant at the moment, but it will become relevant. So that when a team finished their certification training, they took a set of posters with them. And the reason I did that was that I wanted to advertise the training across the organisation. So I could see those posters starting to appear on people's walls. So they might, for example, put a poster up that shows the life cycle that they are using. And those are DA posters that are available on the website. We agreed with the consortium that we actually did a bit of joint branding on them, but anything would work. So that was a practical tip that I would share, really, is publicize it using physical media. That seemed to work because we're trying to create demand for this education. So if somebody walks through an office and says, oh, how come they've got all these posters? And what's this? Then we get a conversation going between two different teams saying, well, this is our life cycle, this is how we operate. And that's a really rich conversation that I want to encourage. So that's one kind of simple thing. But the other part of how we get people involved is through guilds. And so in DA, we call those chapters. So I know these are strong in the States, and we're hoping that we will strengthen these, that we as William Hill could become part of strengthening these in Europe. So we'll almost see that as a development opportunity for people to get involved in meetups and other activities at a local level, so at a city level. And so the thing to do is to look up through the DA website, now the PMI website, obviously, and to see if you've got a local chapter, and if not, to get involved in finding out, is there a local chapter? Can we create one? And at the moment, we're involved in creating some of those in cities that are new to DA,
Yeah.
including where I live. I'm in Yorkshire in the UK, and in Leeds, I'm pretty sure that we don't have a DA chapter, so that's something that we're creating at the moment.
Yeah. Another question, as a newcomer to Agile, is there a ramp up before implementing DA? Example, should the team start with Scrum and then advance to DA?
Yeah, I guess for us, we're perhaps a bit different at the moment because we're already using Agile. So we're in some ways it makes it more complex for my role because I'm trying to work out how best to introduce DA to people that are already kind of happy with the way that they're working.
Mm-hmm.
But I can think of other contexts I've worked in, other places I've worked, and other clients I've worked for that I think there's no, and Josh, you'll be able to answer better, I think. But for me, there's no one answer. It's about context. But the question suggests starting with Scrum and growing from there. I think that feels okay. If I show, or when I show people the DA life cycles, they'll often say, "Oh, I'm using that one," and they'll point to the Scrum one, or they'll say, "I want to use that one because it feels the simplest or the most familiar." That feels okay. I'm not going to tell them what to do, but it feels a good place for them to decide to start. That would be my view on it, Josh.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit to that in that because I get asked that question quite a lot in the training, the certification workshops, or organizations, if I'm coming in to maybe do an assessment, and where should we start? And for one, if you take a look at, again, our agile life cycle in DA, it's based on Scrum. It just kind of extends it, and so you don't have to say we'll get some level of maturity with Scrum, because you can jump right in and get the benefit out of that life cycle. And I'll just quickly say, most teams that I've seen that are very effective at following Scrum, and I'll refer back to professional Scrum, right, looking at the Scrum guide. And again, they'll do things like a sprint zero, or they might have their final sprint where, I don't want to necessarily say it's a hardening sprint, but they're doing some of the production readiness activities because they're getting ready to deploy that consumable functionality, the sufficient functionality they're getting ready to ship it. So a lot of teams are already doing DA if they're using Scrum without really realizing it. And that's the other thing, again, that I'm seeing a lot of is the awareness of DA has been growing is, oh, well, yeah, I've got some experience with Scrum and looks like we're already doing DA because we've gone beyond, again, what's in the Scrum guide itself. So no, I would say if you're not already using an agile way of working, whether it's Scrum or some other approach, jump right in and look at DA. The way that you can use it from a very lightweight perspective, again, an instance that DA can look very much like Scrum.
And also your people, Josh, if you've got a large organization, you never quite know what experience you've got within your people from elsewhere. So what I'm finding is that we've DA has got hundreds of things within it, and we've probably got expertise in all of those things from at least one person. The challenge is finding out who they are because there's 1,000 of them.
Yes. Yeah, and one of the other things is, especially in such large organizations where you do have so many people, is you'll have people that might have really good experience with using Scrum, right? And if you look at the Scrum guide or somebody from, the Scrum organization would come in and say, yeah, you guys have gotten it. But you have a lot of people also that might think they're doing a really good approach. And it's more like what we see, Scrum Fall or Agile in name only or something along those lines where it's like, well, there are some things we can maybe lead you down the path to have better results or use something that is a little bit different than what you came into with your original thinking. I know we're getting really close on time, and we've got just a couple more questions that I think we can get through pretty quickly. So can we still apply DA on static projects that do not have frequent changes like architecture projects building? These usually use waterfall and are very satisfied, and that's by Ahmad. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Laura, I'll ask you if you've got any thoughts. If not, I definitely
Yeah,
have.
I'm sure you can answer much better than I can, Josh, with the detail. But yeah, we certainly trained and certified people from infrastructure teams. That's absolutely fine. They can find their place within this. DevOps is obviously a key part of it, and that gets a lot of interest. But the choice of life cycle means that people who are having to work in what I would call quite a traditional mode for whatever reason, due to their context, which includes infrastructure, yet certainly there are life cycles and ways of working in there that those people can latch onto, definitely.
And as Lori mentioned that there are 6 life cycles in DA, and then there's now kind of the center one, which is at the portfolio level, which is Flex, which looks at optimizing value streams and a lot of other really good things. The latest version of the Choose Your Wild book and some of the new materials that are coming out have business-related life cycles, so non-software development related. And there's also a serial life cycle because there are quantities of work where a waterfall traditional serial life cycle is still possibly the best choice, or something that is going to enable you to keep being efficient without necessarily introducing a change. But you can still take a look at the process goals. There are still practices and techniques that you can get value from, whether you're taking, again, what would be seen as, again, a serial approach or one of the other agile life cycles. Magnesh asks, is DA industry specific? Could Disciplined Agile be advised for a service industry like banking or insurance?
Yeah, I would say definitely, and I have worked in those industries, so my view is yes.
Yeah, as have I. I've worked with financial institutions that have adopted DA, and it's actually something that a lot of financial institutions have moved to because it does fit very well. And the last question we'll take is a two-parter. Well, it's kind of the same. So Dieter asks, can you tell the level of management you report to, such as top, middle function, ideally at which level would you like to report in your position?
That's interesting. So I think, without wanting to sound ageist to myself, as I get older, I care less about things like that. So I just try and get on with my job, and I certainly don't worry about what level of the hierarchy I sit in. but I do think about what my level of influence is, because that's important, particularly as a lead coach. So I think my answer is I'm less concerned about where I sit in the hierarchy. I'm more concerned about my ability to influence.
Yeah.
That's probably it, really.
Yeah. So I do want to, for those of you that are still in attendance, it looks like almost everybody has stayed with us, so I appreciate that as we've gone just a little over. The next week, we're going to have an Ask Me Anything Discipline Agile. So the format is to have Lori and Beth Willett and then Glenn Little come back, and it's just a complete QA. So it's something that will be a different format to be able to ask or for everybody to ask more questions and answers. Again, we'll try and keep the focus on the things that we've talked about in the previous 3 sessions, but we'll go beyond that as we can, or based on the expertise all of us have on it. And Lori, I would just like to thank you for taking the time to join us today and shed some light on, again, a really large scale adoption of Disciplined Agile.
You're welcome. Thanks, Josh.
And again, thanks everyone for attending, and we hope to see you next week and in weeks coming after that.